Hello everybody, how's it been? We're going to be looking at two books today, but don't worry, I'm not going to read the whole two books. The books from the Old Testament, and it's something that is very relevant to the church today. And the topic is on rebuilding the temple. If you know your history, the biblical history, the Israelites were sent into, because of their transgressions, because they abandoned God. And one of the reasons that they abandoned God, one of the steps they took to abandon God, is rejecting God's sovereign rule over them. In the last video, one of the last videos anyway, I talked about this, how they wanted a king, and these kings just increasingly went more and more evil, and eventually the evil of Israel and Judah, because the evil was enough to actually split the kingdom into two, Israel and Judah, and both of them went to exile from different countries. But Judah got the better end of the deal, in the sense of then being exiled is never a good end of the deal. But they got exiled by Babylon, and which was taken over by Persia. And there are two books in the Bible that I think some people say that it used to be one book, Ezra and Nehemiah, because they actually talk about the same thing. The books of Ezra and Nehemiah, they talk about the exiles returning to rebuild the temple with the full authority of the king of Persia, or of the king of Babylon. Yeah, Persia. Sorry, yes. So by this time it's Persia. Because Cyrus isn't well known in the Bible as a king that was sympathetic to the Jews, to the Hebrews. And in the beginning, in Ezra chapter 1, we actually read that he gave authority for some of the exiles to go back to their homeland in Judah and to rebuild their temple. This is continued by in the book of Nehemiah. In Nehemiah, we see that Nehemiah was the cupbearer of the king, and when the king saw that he was troubled, Nehemiah simply said, "How can I not be troubled, Your Majesty? My hometown, my homeland, my city is lying in ruins." And the king gave him authority and even resources to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, and also to rebuild the temple. Eventually we see that Nehemiah became sort of the governor of Jerusalem. Now, what I want to highlight today is how it was not all a bed of roses. Okay, it was all not sunshine and rainbows. And that building these temples, actually rebuilding the temple itself, even though the king of Persia gave his authorization as well as resources, it was full of trouble. They had a lot of people who were opposed to them, and that's what I want to highlight today. We first see the first opposition in Ezra chapter 4. It says, when the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the exiles were building the temple for the Lord, the God of Israel, they came to Zerubbabel and to the heads of the families and said, "Let us help you build, because like you we seek your God and have been sacrificing to him since the time of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here." But Zerubbabel, Joshua, and the rest of the heads of the families of Israel answered, "You have no part with us in building a temple to our God. We alone will build it for the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, commanded us." Then the people around them set out to discourage the people of Judah and make them afraid to go on building. They bribed officials to work against them and frustrate their plans during the entire reign of Cyrus, king of Persia, and down to the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So pretty strong opposition. What is interesting is when these people who opposed the Jews, they were rebuilding the temple, first came to the Jews, they actually sounded very friendly, right? They sounded, "Oh, let us help you, because we've been worshiping your God as well." But God gave the Zerubbabel and the other leaders of Israel wisdom and understanding that these people, even though they sounded like they were friendly, to them and wanting to help, they actually had their own agenda, and the agenda kind of became clear when the moment they said, no, we don't, you have no part in helping us rebuilding our God's temple. And they immediately became hostile. So obviously it was not a sincere desire on the part of these people who pretended to want to help, even though they pretended that they wanted to help. And they obviously had a lot of resources as well, because they were able to bribe officials to frustrate the rebuilding of the temple, not just till the end of the reign of Cyrus, and also down to the reign of Darius after that. Okay, so that's the first thing. Now, why am I talking about this? So, rebuilding the temple, rebuilding the city, it sounds like something that only those exiles were doing, but it is also sort of emblematic or analogous to what we should be doing as Christians. Our mission is to rebuild, to reconnect God as kingly priesthood, as it says in Hebrews. Our job is to reconnect God reconnect the people to God. We are supposed to bring people to God, and this is also one of the Great Commission. Right? We are supposed to reconnect the people to God, to be not so much the bridge, because Jesus is the bridge, but be His co-workers, be His hands and feet in bringing people to back to God, to life. And in so doing, we are rebuilding this kingdom of God. Right? Building the kingdom of God, rebuilding the temple of God on this earth, until it comes again. And so this is an effort. It's a collective effort. It's not just an individual effort. Just like these exiles coming in, who have come to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. That's what we are doing. We're working together. We are we've come with a common purpose and a common mission. But the first kind of opposition that we can see here is people who say to us, you have a great cause, let us help you, They're trying to hijack what we do for God, for their own purposes. I mean, if you think about it, if they're really sincere about about rebuilding the temple, why hadn't they done that before the Jews came? And so likewise, it's the same thing. If some people who kind of want to join our cause, let's work together. If they were sincere, they would have already been doing God's work before we came onto the scene. But our attitude or our mindset should be like Zerubbabel and the elders of Israel. We should understand. We should have asked for God for wisdom. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be working. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be working for people who are not Christians. I mean, the cleaner at the church isn't Christian. You don't have to have everybody working. We don't have in working for God's glory. It doesn't mean we exclude people. We reject people. Right? That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is, when it comes to the things that are essential to the goal, to the purpose, or to the direction of where our ministry or our movement or our group is going, or our ministry is the best word, is going, we can't allow ourselves to be hijacked by the visions of people who don't know God. Okay, so it's okay to work with people who don't know. Like if you, for example, there's a particular. I don't like to mention names here on this channel, but there's a particular very good ministry. Well, they're making a film about the life of Christ. Okay, so, but a lot of people criticize them. How come you're working with non-Christians? Well, it's okay because the purpose. The goal is still the same. The people who are in charge are followers of Christ, and sometimes they use the services of people who are not Christians to those ends. But it only becomes suspect when there are people who come in like these people who pretend to be on the side of the exiles, the return exiles, who would try to subvert what they were doing, and that's what we should be aware of. All right, so we can work with non-Christians, we can work with people who disagree with the gospel to some extent, but we have to be aware that their work doesn't supplant, or their purpose, their agenda doesn't supplant what we're trying to do. Okay, and especially when it comes to like worship. All right, so so the next thing is actually found in Nehemiah. In Nehemiah chapter 4, it's always chapter 4, I don't know why. Chapter 4, we see another example of the opposition to rebuilding. So there are two names that are actually mentioned here in Jeremiah chapter 4. Sanballat and Tobiah. So Sanballat, I'm not actually sure where he came from here. Where is it? But he was a local there. I think he was a local from the area, and then there's also Tobiah, who's sort of an Ammonite. So he was not an Israelite. Who was sort of his sidekick. It actually says at his side. And the first thing that they did was ridicule. Right? He said when Sanballat heard that they were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews. So obviously he was not a Jew. In the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, probably a Samaritan. What are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore the wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are? And then Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, what are they building? Even a fox climbing up on it would break down their walls of stone. The next thing is, so the first strategy that the devil would use to stop the work of God, of the church through people with their own agenda, is subversion. Okay, trying to subvert what we do. Second is what Sanballat and Tobiah are doing here. It's ridicule, and it's very and we get a lot of ridicule, don't we? As Christians, we get a lot of ridicule. We get called names. We get and people, use memes or whatever, that to kind of try to point out, oh, you're so silly, where's your God, and try to use supposedly clever logic, to show how ridiculous and how illogical what we believe, our beliefs are, and our doctrines are, even though they really strawman argument, right? They're the strawman version of what we actually believe. So that's the second one. The second type of attack, or second type of effort that the enemy might put against us in us rebuilding the temple of God in this world. And another one is just direct attack. Okay, so another one is direct attack. So we also see, I think it's actually also in Ezra. So in Ezra, we go back to Ezra. These people who oppose the Jews building the temple, rebuilding the temple, and the walls of Jerusalem, they wrote letters to the king that actually gave authorization for the Jews to rebuild. And they said, and they tried to reason with the king and saying, Your Majesty, if these people rebuild their temple and rebuild their walls, there'll be no more taxes for you. There will be no more income for you. And these are rebellious and wicked people, the city, and they're restoring the walls. They're gonna be no more taxes and tribute or duty will be paid, and eventually the royal revenues will suffer. So, in modern terms, this is what is called lawfare. It's not really a court of law, but it's still appealing to an authority, right? And we will come across that, and a lot of us have come across that, of people trying to do good things, trying to of Christians or churches who are trying to share the gospel, and they come into opposition, and the opposition isn't just ridicule, or isn't just it's just names, but the opposition actually appeals to the government and to courts. Excuse me. I know of a very good, of a very important ministry here in my city, who has been working very hard to help addicts, drug addicts, people who just came out of jail, and that kind of thing. But they constantly are under attack, under difficulty in finding a place to do their ministry, because people around them don't want them, and they keep getting bashed in the media, and they keep getting called names, and people are humans, are humans, are creatures of self-interest, right? Like most creatures, I guess. And this is what these people are doing in this particular passage. What people are doing, they're appealing to the king's self-interest. And a lot of people fall for that, because I got to put myself first, and that's a challenge too. I can't say I have any direct answer to that. How do we overcome these challenges? We can't really overcome these challenges by ourselves, and we can't overcome these challenges on our own. We excuse me. We may have the wisdom to understand the nature of these challenges, of this opposition against us, but we don't necessarily know how to deal with it, how to respond to that. Here's a little bit of a hint. As you read Nehemiah, and I actually first read this Nehemiah from an audio I listened to, and then listened to Dwell. So an app. I didn't actually read it. I was listening to it, and every time it comes across a particular verses, the reader changed the voice, and the reason they changed the voice is it's actually a prayer. For example, Nehemiah. So Nehemiah is an interesting book as well, because it's usually written it mixes third person and first person. So Nehemiah would say, "I went to Jerusalem," but then he would speak in the third person as well, and even Nehemiah mentioning his own name. But then there are bits and pieces here. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I wasn't coughing before. For example, in verse 4, chapter 4, Nehemiah, the author of this book, suddenly just jumped into a prayer, shift into a prayer. "Hear us, O God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in the land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insult in the face of the builders." So it's like Nehemiah suddenly shifted from a narrative voice to a prayer. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. Anyway, I'm not gonna edit this out, okay? A cough is a cough. Anyway, another one is in verse 5, the end of verse 5, chapter 5, verse 19. He was telling what was happening, what people did, and suddenly he just jumped into, "Remember me with favor, O God, my God, for all I have done for these people." So there are prayers mixed into the narrative, which is really interesting, and it's not exactly, it's not the passage doesn't say a sudden Nehemiah prayed this or I prayed this. He just suddenly jumped into a first person prayer. And here's what it speaks to me. Here's what it says to me. What this says to me is the answer to all these challenges is prayer. The answer to all these challenges is prayer. A very young martyred or executed freedom fighter from the days of Nazi Germany. You know her name, Sophie Scholl. She wrote to her boyfriend not long before she was executed. She said, the answer to a barren soul is prayer. It's always prayer. And we are sometimes at a time when the enemy comes to the form through people, and they challenge and they pursue us, and they persecute us in a sense, and they go after us and what we're doing, and to try to discourage us. They try to subvert what we're doing, or they try to appeal to higher authorities, to courts or whatever, to stop us from doing God's work. We can try to kind of fight back. God gives us wisdom to do that too. We can do whatever we want, and these people did. The exiles did that, but none of that would work if we don't pray, if we don't appeal to God, because ultimately He is the one who is above all authorities. He is the one who will give us victory. And it's sometimes victory just doesn't seem to come, no matter what you do. But as one of the disciples said in the Last Supper, who else can we turn to? Yeah. So when we feel frustrated because it seems like we keep coming into challenges, and remember, the rebuilding of this temple took so long because it was constantly being challenged, being opposed by the people who were around them. But eventually it succeeded. It did succeed. Bring it to God in prayer. Right, that's it. I think it's been too long, this video, so I'll see you next time.